that only 10% about Filipino people, but they earn a lot of money, so that is very important part of Filipino economy. So good morning, Magatao. This is jisoo. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I will watch why are there so many Filipino nurses in the US. I didn't know this fact, so this video will help to understand why Filipino nurses exist in US. So now let's watch this video together.
Immigrants, we get the job done. Or so the song goes. So we all know that when it comes to labor, the United States loves immigrants. And one of the most unique stories of American immigration and labor actually comes from the Philippines.
I already know 10%, about 10% of Filipinos go abroad to work, to earn money. I already know that because abroad income is more higher than work in Philippines, so that's why they go outside to work, right? Why there are so many Filipino nurses in the US? Yes.
Okay, so you might be saying, Sana, the US has a lot of Filipino nurses? Yep. Here's what's up. Back in 2015, foreign-born Filipinos made up the fourth largest group of immigrants in the country. And the majority of
Wow, that number 4 is Philippines? Wow, that is very big amount of percentage, right?
Filipinos are in California, where they make up 20% of the nursing force,
Whoa.
which is impressive when you consider that they only make up about 4% of the state's population. Now, it's easy to think of the Philippines as all the way over there, and the United States right over here. But Dr. Catherine Sneeza Choi, who wrote the book Empire of Care, says that imagining Filipinos as simply foreigners actually erases a history between the countries.
Filipinos, and specifically certain groups of Filipino immigrant workers, like immigrant nurses, are not foreigners in the way we tend to think about foreigners. They actually have historical interaction with Americans.
And that interaction
So that's why a lot of Filipino go nurses in the US.
begins
Interaction
like so many
is
other
a
immigrant
key.
interactions with colonization. The Spanish colonized and ruled the archipelago we now call the Republic of the Philippines for a few centuries. In 1898, the Americans and the Spanish went to war, and it ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. As a result, the Americans got a lot of territories from the Spanish, one
Yes,
of which
after Spanish, USA.
was the Philippines. But the people of the islands didn't welcome the Americans. They wanted their independence, not more colonizers. That resistance led to the 3-year-long Philippines-American War from 1899 to 1902, and it was fought between US forces and Filipino nationalists. And it was a brutal war for Filipinos. It killed 20,000 combatants and 200,000 civilians as a result of the violence.
I didn't know this. USA and then Philippines did a war. I didn't know that. It's very interesting to me because I didn't know this fact.
Diseases like cholera and malaria, and even famine. When the war ended, the Philippines came under the colonial control of the United States. And that's when the story of the Filipino nurses begins. Like in its other colonies, the United States began the Americanization of the islands after setting up a government in the Philippines.
You also had American colonial officials going to the Philippines and exposing Filipinos to American culture, to the English language.
Yes, that's why Philippines official languages is English also, right? That's why.
Americanized education. And this kind of training influenced so many different groups of Filipinos to dream about the U.S. and to desire to migrate there.
American health
Filipino also wanted to go US, right?
workers in the Philippines needed locals to deal with the health issues of Filipinos because malaria and cholera had killed so many during the war. But they didn't find any nurses trained the way the Americans had been trained. And so they began recruiting Filipino women to work as what were called volunteer auxiliary and contract nurses. Around the same time,
that is the beginning of Filipino nurses, right?
in 1903, President William Taft passed a law that allowed and funded certain Filipino students to study in American colleges. And this led to the first wave of Filipino nurses coming to the United States, and it also led to a lot of the nurses staying. They even established their presence with organizations like the Philippine Nurses Association of New York, and the waves of Filipino nurse migration continued throughout the 20th century, especially as the United States opened up its borders a bit more. During World War
that is a beginning. And then I think Filipino is good at work, so that's why still now a lot of Filipina and the Filipino nurses exist in US, I think. If they are not good at work, US don't need to hire them, but they are good at work, so that's why they still uses a lot of Filipino nurses.
More Filipino nurses were trained to serve in the US military, and during the same time, the Philippines came under Japanese occupation. After the war ended, the United States granted the territory independence in 1946, and 2 years later, the State Department introduced the Exchange Visitor Program, a little something created to push back against Soviet influence. You know, bring more people into the United States and show them what the capitalist good life is actually all about. Because of the decades-long colonial relationship and education in English language, the Philippines became a model country for the program, and the nurses led the way. The program was so successful that it actually encouraged more Filipinos to go into nursing. The number
and then I think that colonized history also can be helped to go there because they already know American culture well, so that's why they can go more easily than other countries.
Nurses in the Philippines jumped over 700%, from 7,000 in 1948 to over 57,000 in 1953.
Only 5 years that jumped about more than 7 times, right? About 8 times.
The program also encouraged the building of more nursing schools in the Philippines. Back in 1940, there were only 10, and today, 429. That program, in addition to the 1965 Immigration Act, opened up the borders even more for educated Filipinos. And so by 1973, we end up seeing over 12,000 Filipino nurses immigrate to the United States. But I gotta mention this, it wasn't just because of American immigration policies that so many Filipinos were migrating to the US. In the 1970s, with President Ferdinand Marcos, who ruled under martial law, a policy of labor export was introduced. The whole idea behind the export of labor was that Filipinos would travel abroad on work contracts, make money, send it back home, and thus help us.
I mean that. So that's why a lot of 10% of Filipino people go outside, go abroad to earn money and then send money to their home, right?
Economy. The government even created an agency that directly provided migrant labor to foreign governments and companies. That policy pretty much made the Philippines one of the top exporters of labor. I mean, check this. About 10% of all Filipinos are foreign workers. That's around 10 million people in around 170
Yes, that is what I said, and then I already knows that 10% Filipino spread all over the world to earn money.
And did the policy of exporting labor actually work for the economy? Well, for decades, the Philippines has been one of the top 5 recipients of money transfers from migrant labor. Shout out to Western Union. Not sponsored. Take, for instance, how in 2015, over 3 million Filipinos left the country to work abroad. They sent back $28.5 billion, which made up about 1/10 of the Philippines' total GDP. So exported labor is a big deal for the Philippines.
Yes, that 10%, that only 10% about Filipino people, but they earn a lot of money, so that is very important part of Filipino economy, so they are good.
It really does get to the heart of the Filipino immigrant experience, whether in a country like Saudi Arabia or in the United States.
Saudi Arabia. So, sometimes on my comments say hi Jisoo, I'm from Philippines, but I'm in Saudi Arabia now. That's why I solved that question now. That's why some of comments I'm in Saudi Arabia.
Equally important to note that despite the so-called success of the export of Filipino labor, it's come with a lot of sacrifice, struggle, and vulnerability. Take, for example, Filipino nurses here in the United States who are professionals but still face discrimination.
The vulnerability of being immigrant nurses can also be connected to being exploited by being assigned sometimes the most undesirable kinds of work on the nursing floor, or being assigned on the most undesirable shifts. Unfortunately, they are not the kinds of challenges we often think about in the United States that these women would have because they are professional immigrant workers.
But
and then they are professional is the main.
Though exported or imported labor is central to Filipino migration, especially to the United States, that's not the only part of the Filipino immigrant experience. In the United States, Filipinos, both citizens and immigrants, have used their experiences to fight for workers' rights. In fact, one of the biggest labor movements in the United States was sparked by Filipino laborers.
Really? I didn't know that also.
In 1965, Filipino grape farm workers in Delano, California, went on strike against poor working conditions and low wages. Farm workers across the country joined in on the strike, which eventually led to an international boycott of grapes. The 5-year strike ended with a major win for the farm workers. They got union contracts that protected them.
Wow, that is Filipinos did. Wow, they make a one page about history, right?
Immigrants and citizens have been and remain a central part of the U.S.'s social fabric. They've not only provided labor in industries that needed it the most, but at times have also protected it.